Hello and welcome to Magicians Only. Are you a magician? It doesn't matter. Everyone is welcome. If you love magic, this is the place for you. We're going to be discussing all kinds of things. We're going to be discussing the history of magic, the secrets, the tricks, the psychology of it, and the absolute nut jobs that are in this profession, including me, Steve Valentine, your host. As always, Magicians Only is sponsored by Magic on the Go, the absolutely insane database of magic that is at your fingertips, on your phone, and in your pocket. Thanks to Magic on the Go, you can be amazing anytime, anywhere. If you forget a routine, it's right there for you to watch and listen to. If you want to learn something while you're traveling, it's there for you. You don't have to grab any videotapes, remember those, or DVDs, or anything like that. It's just there for you to stream at your fingertips. Go to magiconthego.com, join the club today. All right. Well, actually, as if he was English, it would be more like, all right, here we are. We are at part 2 of the Horace Goldin egg bag. Some great revelations in this episode. It really shook me how much I was able to find out. There's a lot of techniques and secrets that are referred to here. You can find out all of the more juicier detail at magiconthego.com in the massive egg bag masterclass teaching that is part of the entire global site. Egg bag is a fantastic trick. It's a classic trick, but it's a deceivingly hard trick to get away with. Horace Goldin was one of the best. So let's see what Mr. Valentine has found out, shall we? I really shouldn't be talking about myself in the third person. Like I said, nut job. When we ended the last episode, we'd found out a few things, including the fact that he used to shove eggs into spectators' mouths on stage so that they could then produce said egg from mouth. Yeah. So I think I've kind of pieced together a routine. I'm going to go over it in a minute with you, but let's look at this. First of all, the mouth load. I mean, the idea of shoving an egg into somebody's mouth. I think even back then, it was probably as hard to do as it would be now. And now that we're in such a litigious world, I think it would be a really bad idea. Can you imagine giving someone salmonella? Their hands are dirty. We certainly couldn't do it nowadays. I mean, to say that he got the egg inside someone's mouth. I mean, have you tried putting an egg in your mouth lately? It's not easy. However, a little extra investigation on my part on the work of Thurston and a few other people around their era shows that the idea of shoving an egg into someone's mouth was quite commonplace. In fact, Thurston did it with kids in his show while he was doing his eggs out of the hat routine. It seems that it could have been a real thing, which is terrifying. I do recall someone reminiscing once in an old abracadabra about being a kid and being pulled up on stage and having a metal shell of an egg shoved into their mouth. In fact, I think the comment was a rusty metal shell shoved into my mouth. So look, I think that there's a good possibility that he did do this, but I have a theory. So there's two things that come to mind here. One is that the spectator was a Confederate, and I say this because for a number of reasons. One, he always used a bald guy for the bit on the head. Two, we know that he was aggressive with the people that came up on stage. And maybe the idea that the person already had an egg in their mouth and he was trying to open the guy's mouth in order to get the egg out is why people said he was very aggressive with his quote-unquote assistants. If you've already got someone who is a stooge who's in the audience who pops an egg in his mouth right before he comes up on stage, you can be as rough with that person as you want. Pretty sure he wouldn't shove an egg in a king's mouth, but nevertheless, in his stage show, I'll bet you that's what he did. The only other thing I can think of is that maybe he had it palmed in his hand and he just had the person open their mouth and made it look like he popped the egg out of their mouth. And that's kind of dangerous too. You could accidentally hit the egg against a person's teeth and break one or both. So this whole chapter seems to be Goldin telling us how brilliant he is. Well, the whole book is Goldin telling the public how incredible he is. There's even a photograph of Goldin's hands. He says it takes many years to practice with the egg. Really? Many years? He really builds it up, but years to learn how to palm? Oh God, I hope not. He says there's many sidelines to perform sidelines with the egg. What does that mean? Well, does that mean learning how to steal it? Maybe palming, stealing, transferring it from hand to hand, loading it into other people's pockets, maybe doing the toss vanish at one point. But really, there's not that much in the quote-unquote sideline business when it comes to the egg bag. Of course, it's a lot simpler in reality than how he's selling it to the public. He wants everyone to think that what he's doing is incredibly difficult. Let's hope it doesn't take any of us 40 years to attain any proficiency. Now, there's a bit of business here that I think at first I was dismissing, but now that I'm looking at it, hiding the egg under the spectator's lapel. He says that he takes a lot of risks. And if you've got a blown egg, an eggshell, an empty eggshell, and the lapels back in those days of the jackets were quite large. But I think this might be a brilliant bit of business. The idea that you could pop the egg underneath the spectator's lapel so the audience could see it but the spectator can't would have the same comedy potential as, say, card on forehead or paper balls over the head. It's funny because at first I was like, nah, that's just a bit of BS. But the more I think about it, the lapel bit I could see being a fantastic comedy moment. I think my favorite moment in the entire chapter was when he claimed to have somebody make the bag on stage. I mean, come on. Was the egg bag so legendary that you had to prove to the audience it was a normal bag by making the bag on stage? The only time I think that would possibly have happened is if he'd lost his egg bag and he needed to get another one real quick. And if he's got a seamstress backstage, he's like, come on stage and make me a bag. But really, it's a great story though, isn't it? No, he says he never uses Confederates, but that's usually what someone says when they use Confederates, I have to say. The more I think about it, if the person has the egg in the mouth and he's using a bald person and he wants the person to be able to be roughed up and used aggressively, having a good stooge would guarantee him the laughs that he needs, because the reality is that this is, well, let's be honest, this is really the only patter presentation piece in his entire show. Most of his show was to music. So this is really his only chance to connect with an audience on a personal level and get a lot of comedy. And the old timers, man, they left nothing to chance. Usually what they would do is they would stage cue, which means they would whisper to the spectator as they came up from the audience and tell them to do things. And this can be very funny. And in Judson Cole's routine, which we'll talk about in the Egg Bag teach-in, he used stage cueing with the kids all the time for his Egg Bag routine. So you can either stage cue or you can use a Confederate. I'm leaning towards Confederate for Goldin because this is a guy who was very smart but didn't take any risks. Now, it doesn't mean he couldn't do the egg bag with anyone from the audience. Obviously, he was doing it for royalty. But for his show, I'll guarantee you he used a stooge. When he could, of course. I love the moment when he says there was hypnotism and willpower for the egg bag. I mean, if I had the power of hypnosis and to control somebody by willpower, I don't think I'd waste it on an egg bag. But maybe what he's referring to here is reading people and their body language. And this is actually great advice because, let's face it, no two performances will ever be the same. He says it in the book, and it's absolutely true. And quite often we as performers are guilty of trying to make every performance exactly the same, exactly how we rehearsed it. No two spectators are the same. It's a common trap we fall into, trying to fit the square peg of an overly rehearsed routine into the round hole of real life and what's happening then. But I can tell you that if once you learn a routine, if you're willing to move out of it and around it and get back into it when the time is right, if you're able to go with the flow and deal with the real people who are coming up on your stage, they're not just pegs on which you hang your tricks, they're real people. If you can do that, and you will come across as human and your performance will become electric. People will lean in and watch because they realize that anything could happen. That's what makes a performance compelling. And I guarantee you, they will give you so many more laughs than you could ever have imagined. And quite often, they'll give you some of your best lines. He does talk a lot about taking flagrant risks with his victim. He keeps calling the guy the victim who comes up to help him with the egg bag. And I think that's a huge tip too, as far as we were talking about popping the egg under the lapel, maybe balancing it on his shoulder, holding it on one side of his face so he can't see it. Maybe there's a moment where he's got the egg palmed, but he's passing it from hand to hand so the audience can see the egg moving around, but the spectator can't. Anyway, I think here is a guy who clearly had control of his audience, who dominated the stage, and when he pulled the guy up from the audience, whether he was a Confederate or not, Goldin, quote unquote, spoofed him, absolutely made fun of him. Goldin was very conscious of his thick accent as well. So I think this trick worked because it was a situational comedic piece, not necessarily that many lines. It was about the situations he was able to create by shoving the guy's face into the bag and having the wrists held and using the bald head. We've all had intoxicated assistants, and I have to say, having worked at the Magic Castle where the drinks are flowing all night long and the audiences get progressively drunker as the night continues, yeah, I've handled all kinds of drunk crowds and drunk assistants. I once had a girl at my table, and I think the host seated her at my close-up table in the close-up room because she was stunningly beautiful. He thought that would be good, but by the way, that's never good because then everyone just wants to look at the girl. But she was sitting there and she was absolutely hammered. I mean, she was swaying on the chair. And I'll never forget, at one point, I just couldn't continue the show. She picks up one of my sponge balls and she puts it in her mouth and just looks at me with this sponge ball between her lips. I remember what I said at the time. I remember saying, oh, now I know where I've seen you before. I don't know really quite what that meant, but it got a massive laugh. Anyway, I got her boyfriend to just kind of like bring her back to her seat because it was ridiculous. But look, yeah, we do get drunk assistants, and it's a very difficult thing to deal with because you can send them back to their seats, but they might get aggressive on that. You might look like you're not a good sport, but they can also ruin the show. I mean, if you're good with comedy and you're good with working with people, they can also help your show. It's a fine line. I think the story of the guy reaching into his pocket and pulling out the egg is a good one. He may have embellished it a little bit, but I'm pretty sure, yeah, I could just imagine a guy coming up on stage when Goldin says, no, sir, it's not in my pocket, check the pocket, and the guy pulls out an egg that he brought to the theater. I could see that happening. Whether the person came to the show a whole bunch of times, but most likely it was probably a local magician trying to one-up Goldin on stage, right? Because that happened a lot. Look at Houdini's career. There was always jealous magicians who were trying to destroy his reputation. So I think the idea of somebody in the audience pulling an egg out as if they actually did catch him is probably true. Probably happened more than once. I think there may be a case of the lady doth protest too much when he adds the detail about the white suit. But it's a great story. I wonder how many of you would sneak the egg back into the spectator's pocket and break it. After all, he did bring it to the theater. It's his egg. We all tell stories of how we topped the bad audience member or the bad situation, of how the trick killed. My gosh, I just did it a few moments ago with the girl with the sponge ball in her mouth. But Horace Goldin had so much experience, and he faced every type of audience. I mean, I've seen the difference that 3 shows a night for 7 nights can make at the Magic Castle. By the end of that week, you feel like you know that show backwards. You feel like you're so relaxed that you can handle anything that's thrown your way. And when you look at someone like Horace Goldin, who literally did thousands and thousands of shows, and let's be honest, that egg bag trick was really the only patter trick he did in his big show. We know when he did a parlor show for Kings and Queens, he was doing smaller tricks like the knotted handkerchiefs, etc. But it really must have been quite something to see him perform the egg bag. Here's what I think the routine is. I think structurally it's really similar to Arnold the Bear because they both learned the trick from Albini. I think Goldin gets a guy up on stage. There's a bit of business that he talks about where he says, "Sir, could you check the step here? It looks a little bit rocky. Would you mind just putting your foot in it so it doesn't fall over?" That's the step coming up to the stage. So the guy stands up, he puts his foot on the bottom step in order to kind of hold the steps steady. And then Goldin says, "Would you put your other foot on this step and your other foot?" And that's how he gets the guy up on stage. It's a funny bit of business. He gets the guy up on stage. he either loads the egg into the guy's mouth or the guy's a Confederate with the egg in his mouth. So the very first part of that trick is that he's producing the egg from the spectator's mouth. Guy's bald, so he probably holds the egg up to the guy's head and makes some comments about kind of the similarities between the egg and the spectator. After all, this man is his victim in the trick. That's his approach to this. I think he does the egg vanish from the bag, where he apparently slips it into the pocket. We know that he needs someone in the audience or the guy on stage to say, you put it in your pocket. We know that he needs that. He pops the bag down probably on the floor, just like the bear, and takes off the jacket and gives it to the man or somebody else in the audience. That person then goes through the pockets, makes sure there's no egg in there, and meanwhile, Goldin produces it back from the bag. Now he goes into the fake explanation, which he does probably underneath the armpit or in the pocket, the whole bit of business. We know that he's got a one-handed bit of business that he does where he shows the egg has gone from the bag. We know he puts the bag on the person's head to prove it's not in there. We know he folds up the bag and slaps it on his own hand. We know he does all those bits of business. And then we also know that his wrists are held by the spectator and he's still going to make the egg appear back inside the bag. And we know that he shoves that guy's face. Chances are he probably kept the bit in where the guy's hand was in the bag while he made the egg reappear. But here's the thing that I think he did if he was using the Albini bag and not the Mellini bag. I get the impression Horace Goldin was a real artist. He knew how to sell a trick, he knew how to milk the most out of it, and he knew how to get the most applause. And when you have someone else reach into the bag and pull out the egg, for a magician, it's amazing. And certainly Hobson kills with it when he does it. But the timing is never quite right, because the spectator is the one who pulls it out. And therefore, it's never quite, they don't just pull it out and hold it up and take a bow. It's always a bit messy. They look in the bag, they see the egg, or they feel the egg, they look at you and they ask you if you want them to take it out, and you say yes, and they fumble and they take out the egg, and sometimes they don't even show it to the audience. You do have that great reaction on their face, which we would use in order to sell the effect, but it's kind of messy. And Goldin didn't do that. There's no way he would have done that. Plus, it's an Albini bag, so it's not possible. You can't have a spectator reach into the bag and pull the egg out unless you have that scoop, that Mellini scoop. So I know that the way he finished this was he's done the fake explanation. He's probably put the egg behind the lapel of the spectator at one point where he's shown that the bag is completely empty. I bet that was a lot of fun. He could then produce it from the lapel, and the spectator would look like an idiot, which is great. Then he would, so he does the vanish in the bag. The bag is empty. He's smashing it. He's folding it. He puts it on the guy's head, probably smoothing it over the guy's bald head and slapping it. You can imagine he's very aggressive. It's definitely not in his bag. He has his wrists, both wrists held by the spectator. This is a difference between De Beer and Goldin, by the way, that I really believe that Goldin only used one person, whereas De Beer used two. There you go. Slight difference in staging and filling the stage, right? He's got the egg. It's in the bag. He has the wrists held. Spectator looks in, feels in there. There's no egg. He looks in there. There's no egg. With his wrist held, Goldin reaches into the bag, pulls out the egg himself, so that the timing of the final moment is right. Now, I'll bet you he did that right in the face of the spectator. Here's the egg, and maybe one final move where he goes to toss it at the spectator and it disappears. He thanks the guy and sends him back to his seat. Now, so how is this different from De Beer? It's just more aggressive. It's more vulgar. There's a lot of physical back and forth, a lot of head shoving and poking and pushing and prodding and shoving an egg into somebody's mouth. There's a lot of that stuff. And here's what I believe is the most valuable piece that I got from the entire recollection. And that was that Goldin used a red velvet egg bag. Not a black bag that nobody could see. It was a red velvet, probably velveteen bag. I think this is very telling. You know, Hobson uses a red bag. I think the bag has to be seen. And a pro like Goldin knew that. Also, it's a red velvet bag. That's classy. That's sophisticated. And clearly he didn't rely on the black interior to hide the egg. In the teaching on Egg Bag, we will physically go through what I think Goldin's routine was. But I think you can see that when you investigate and pick things apart, you can often find real gems. And you know what? I'll be honest, it's usually when I scoff at something and I turn my nose up at something as being ridiculous that I will then have second thoughts, look back at it and go, oh, wait a minute, that's genius. And I think Horace Goldin was a genius. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Steve Valentine. This is Armchair Story. Hold on a second. Something just happened. Now, I could go back and re-record the entire conversation, but I think what we'll do here is we'll just tell you exactly what happened. So it's 3 o'clock in the morning, Friday, July 17th. Normally I don't date these things, but I think this is kind of interesting, maybe. And I just finished editing this particular podcast, which took a long time because it's over an hour. And I thought I'd do a quick bit of extra research. And what do I come across but a review of the act and a description, minor, but more than I've ever seen before, of the Horace Goldin egg bag presentation. So I'm going to read it to you. There's good and bad. One is, as far as my analysis and what I think it was that he did, I think I was wrong on one part, but I feel I am vindicated on the other part. So this is good, though. This is a learning experience. It goes to show this is not a science. This is the piecing together bits of a jigsaw puzzle, right? But let me read to you what was said. Now, bear in mind that this is a very tight description, but it gives us a couple of extra beats that we didn't know about before. This was in the Sphinx, and it was a review of Goldin's show by a chap called Clinton Burgess, who was very much deep within the magic community of that time. First of all, let me say that in all of my research, it seems that in the past, the egg bag was mainly done, or seems to have been always done, with male volunteers. And that's an interesting change for these days, because most of the time, if you see someone perform the egg bag, they're doing it with ladies. I think that the men, when they come up for egg bag, were probably more aggressive. And in the old days of vaudeville, you could handle those things. Nowadays, it's a little harder to deal with aggressive spectators in a classy way. So, because, everyone's so sensitive, you can respond to something somebody does, but you're still the bad guy or girl, as the case may be. This is a description by Clinton Burgess of Horace Goldin's program. It was a 20-minute show, right? 20 minutes. Now remember, Goldin's whole thing was to pack his program with magic. That's what made his show different. It was bam, 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 bam magic. The review starts off with, it took Horace Goldin but 20 minutes to completely baffle a packed house at Proctor's 23rd Street Theatre with the following. Here's what blew me away, was the positioning of the egg bag in the show. So he starts with a burnt paper to streamers and silks and a big flag on a staff, and then he moves to a production of a large bowl of water and fish, and then he does the trick with the birds, the bag and the cage, and then he does the cut and restored turban. You can see that online, his handling of that. Then he produces 2 ducks from an empty tub. They vanish again. He jerks a silk handkerchief out from underneath a pyramid of glasses and then a tablecloth from underneath the pyramid. He produces a rabbit from the shadow screen. Again, you can see that routine online. He transforms a chair to a suitcase and exits. That's online. He does the Hindu boy and rope trick. He does the Indian rope trick, and then the same with a girl. And then he does this incredible illusion called film to life, where a girl on screen becomes real. And then he shoots a handkerchief from a pistol to a glass on a pedestal. And then a lady walks through a sheet of plate glass. Now, all these miracles have happened. And now the 15th item in his program, the second to last routine, is the egg bag. Imagine all the miracles that have happened before, and yet he feels so strongly about the egg bag and the power of the egg bag that he places it at essentially the feature position. The most important thing you can do in your show is the second to last routine. That is the most important one. That's the one that you build the show towards. And then the finale trick is something that's designed to raise everybody to their feet and get you off stage cleanly. But the second to last, the penultimate performing piece, is the most important. So for Goldin, it was his egg bag. Now, it says right here, egg bag. committee of two on stage. Oh man, committee of two. I said probably one. There's two, but listen, there's more. After one volunteer examines the bag, Goldin returns his watch. He next produces the egg from the other man's mouth, works the bag trick with great effect, and as the men are leaving the stage, Goldin again returns the watch of the volunteer assistant. Now, there's a couple of things that are really cool here. One is, okay, there's two volunteers. I mentioned earlier on that I like the two because it's better staging, but many people have used just one volunteer in the past. Hobson only uses one, but here Goldin uses two, and I think there's a very good reason for this, not just staging. First of all, he gets the two people up on stage, and then he returns one spectator's watch. That's a great moment, right? But what he's doing is he's setting up a callback to the end. So he steals this person's watch. He next produces an egg from the and he gets the bag to be examined. Now, here was the thing with the Albini bag. You can have it examined, as you will see when I describe it, if you do a light stitching through the bottom of the bag, and then all you have to do is to pull the thread out, it's a little knot at the end, and you pull the thread out, and now you have an egg bag. So I don't think he switched the bag in his sleeve because that's the wrong moment in which to take off your jacket. So I believe he has the bag examined and then he pulls the thread out. Or there's a second possibility, which I'll get to in a second. So he returns the watch, great moment, and also kind of fills that time while the other volunteer is examining the bag. He then produces an egg from the other man's mouth. All right, so now there you go. He does do the egg from the mouth. He works the bag trick with great effect, and as the men, not women, men, and I'll bet you it was always men, as the men are leaving the stage, Goldin again returns the watch of the volunteer assistant. But here's the thing, in the review, Clinton Burgess, right after the word volunteer, puts a question mark in parentheses. In other words, returns the watch of the volunteer assistant. Was he a volunteer? I think what Burgess is saying right here is this guy was probably a stooge. This makes total sense. You get two people up on stage, one's a real spectator, one is a stooge. You can get super aggressive with the stooge and maybe pull the egg out of his mouth, and you can do, like I said before, you can set that whole thing up so that you get the most effect out of it. And maybe if you're returning that person's watch as well, then you can fake the watch steal, have a watch that's easy to remove. Because again, this is the most important thing that Goldin is doing. This is the most important routine in his entire show. He wants to make sure that each beat is hit really well, really fast, and really hard. Wasn't a slow routine. Honestly, there are 16 effects in a 20-minute program. This thing must have been 2 minutes max. I reckon maybe this was the longest routine, although the film to life seems to have been a bit more of a undertaking. But the egg bag. So again, all right, two people up on stage. It's great because if one's a stooge, the other one isn't, right? So if they get talked to afterwards, you know that at least one of the people that were up on stage was a local person. That kind of balances out the stooge to regular person ratio. It's good psychology. The egg from the mouth, and maybe even the watch steal could be done with the stooge. And obviously you can get a little more aggressive with that person. Also, I love the idea that Goldin was using the watch steal a second time. Now, I've known plenty of people who are experts at the watch steal. Hobson does a watch steal. There was a chap in the early 90s I knew a little bit called Chappie Brazil. Chappie put out a DVD, or at that point a VHS, on the watch steal. Chappie would steal my watch over and over again at the Magic Castle, and it used to piss me off. I would put it back on. A couple of minutes later, he's doing a card trick. He's got my watch again. So I know that it's possible to continually steal a spectator's watch. And I think after you've done it once, I honestly don't think they expect you to do it again. So it probably isn't that hard. So yeah, it's possible that the watch steal was real. But if you've got a stooge and you're stooging the egg, why not stooge the watch steal as well in order to make it easier? There's also the possibility that if the guy is a stooge, if one of the guys is a stooge, then that may be the guy that's examining the bag. So therefore, you don't even need to do the stitching effect or switch the bag. So that's really effective. So I don't know how I feel about all this. I feel somewhat vindicated because I think there was a stooge used. He did do the egg from the mouth, but probably with the stooge. I love the fact that he uses a watch steal and then calls back to it at the end. That must be a fantastic moment. I still think he does a very fast egg bag routine in between those moments, kind of bookended by the egg from mouth and the watch steal, which would be He attempts to vanish the egg. He gets called out on putting it into his pocket. He takes off the jacket. It's examined. He reproduces the egg from the bag. Then he shows how he was going to do it. He does the fake explanation, which then leads into the test conditions. Egg bag, vanish one more time where the wrists are held. Maybe it's a one-hand vanish with the hands. He thrusts the head into the bag. He really makes a big deal out of it. Struggles with the guys that are holding his wrists. Pulls the egg out of the bag himself at the end, and then does the final watch moment as he sends the person back to their seat. And that's it. There's a great line, which I found also in a magazine. This is how I want to leave this armchair story on Horace Goldin's egg bag. Horace Goldin said, "The great secret of the egg bag trick is all in how you handle the on-stage volunteer." And I think that says it all. This has been another edition of Magicians Only with your resident nutjob, Steve Valentine. We hope you enjoyed this episode. It took a lot of work to get it where it was. And I hope to see you out there performing your egg bag routine at some point. Even though, don't forget, there did come a time when so many people were doing the egg bag that theaters would have a sign in the back dressing rooms that would say, "No egg bags." Just something to think about. Magicians Only is sponsored by Magic on the Go, the greatest online magic school in the world. It's the only thing you need to learn magic. Magic on the Go is a little different in that it's an immersive experience. We don't tell you what you need to know and in what order. You dive in and you learn what appeals to you. It's a choose your own adventure with so much content that you will be drowning in great material. If that's kind of maybe that isn't such a good analogy, but you know what I'm saying. It's all there for you. It's visual. You can see how the tricks work. You can see what they look like, and you can see what works for you. That's Magic on the Go at magiconthego.com. I'll see you on the inside.